David Cunningham stood frozen in the straw, his breath caught in his throat. He had helped cows deliver calves countless times in his life, but never had his hands shaken like this. Nessie, his most trusted cow, was on her side, groaning through the strain of labor. David had been ready for twins, maybe even prepared for complications, but what he had just seen sliding into the world stopped him cold. Julie, his wife, hovered just behind him, clutching the gate. Her gasp sliced the heavy silence. "David, is that—" She couldn't even finish the question. David's face had drained of color. He crouched lower, heart hammering, eyes wide as the newborn calf shifted weakly in the hay. It wasn't the first one. It wasn't the second. Something was terribly, impossibly different this time. His farming instinct screamed that this shouldn't be happening. Not here, not now, not ever. The air inside the pen seemed to press down heavier with every second. David swallowed hard, unable to speak, unable to move. What had Nessie just done? Cows weren't supposed to do this, not here, not ever. So what on earth had Nessie just brought into the world? David Cunningham had been a farmer for as long as he could remember. The land beneath his boots carried the weight of 3 generations before him, each season etching a new story into the soil. While other farmers relied on ear tags and records to keep track of their herds, David never needed them. He knew each of his cows by sight, by gait, even by the way they lowed at dusk. But there was one he knew better than all the rest, a broad, gentle cow with curious eyes named Nessie. Nessie was special, and not just because David had a soft spot for her. Over the years, she had given him something most farmers only saw once in a lifetime. The first time she delivered twins, David had been ecstatic. It was supposed to be rare, maybe 1 in 100 births. When it happened again, he laughed it off as chance. By the 3rd time, he couldn't ignore the truth anymore. Nessie was different. She had a gift. But David was no fool. Farming had taught him that gifts often came with hidden costs. "Luck doesn't last forever," he'd mutter under his breath. And yet, sometimes when he watched Nessie graze at the far end of the pasture, he wondered if she carried a secret no farmer could expect. It was during one of those long evenings that his wife, Julie, had teased him about his predictions. The two of them had been standing on the porch, watching Nessie's belly sway as she moved. "So," Julie said, nudging him with a smirk, "what do you think this time?" 1 or 2? David didn't hesitate. 2, maybe more. Julie raised an eyebrow, unimpressed. "You're so sure of yourself, huh? Tell you what, if you're wrong, you're finishing the last 6 miles of fencing on your own." She gestured toward the pile of posts stacked in the shed, the job every farmer hated. Digging holes, setting posts, stretching wire. It could take weeks. David rubbed his chin, pretending to think. He knew she was serious. "And if I'm right?" "Then I'll help you finish it," Julie replied, her grin widening. They shook hands on it, and though Julie laughed, David's smile didn't quite reach his eyes. He had grown up with cattle long enough to trust his gut, and something about Nessie this time gnawed at him. Over the next few days, David kept a closer watch. Nessie wasn't her usual calm self. She paced the enclosure, restless and uneasy. Sometimes she would press her head against the fence as if listening to something only she could hear. At night, David lay awake, replaying every detail in his mind. The way she breathed heavier than normal, the odd bulge of her belly, the flick of her ears at shadows in the barn. Julie noticed it too. "You're worried," she said one morning, watching him scatter feed. David sighed. "I don't know what it is. She's tougher than most, but this time it feels different." Different how? He couldn't put it into words. But as the due date crept closer, the unease settled heavier on his shoulders. What if Nessie's streak of luck had finally run out? Or worse yet, what if she was carrying something so unusual, so impossible, that it would change everything he thought he knew about farming? David shook the thought from his mind. Still, the question lingered. What was Nessie hiding this time? David had delivered so many calves in his lifetime that he could almost predict each stage. He knew the restless pacing before labor, the heavy sighs as contractions began, the way a cow would finally lie on her side and brace for the push. Nessie was following every pattern he knew by heart, and still, something felt off. He crouched beside her, hand steadying the bucket, eyes fixed on her swollen belly. Then he saw it, 2 tiny hooves pushing their way into the world. His pulse quickened, though his hands moved with practiced calm. Within minutes, the first calf slid out, landing softly in the hay. It blinked, coughed, then let out a weak bleat before wriggling its way upright. Relief surged through David. "That's it, girl," he murmured, patting Nessie's side. "You did good." Julie clapped her hands together, grinning. "Well, looks like I'll be holding the hammer and nails this week." David chuckled. It was exactly what he expected. Twins had been Nessie's trick 3 times already, but she'd had to start with 1. He reached for a towel to rub the calf clean, certain the hard part was behind them. But then Nessie strained again. David froze. He knew that look, the twitching skin along her flank, the shallow, determined breaths. She wasn't done. Julie's smile faltered. "Wait? Another?" David's lips pressed thin, though he tried to sound steady. "Maybe. Let's see." A second set of hooves appeared, slower this time, the effort making Nessie grunt. David leaned in, guiding gently until a second calf slid free. It hit the hay with a soft thud, smaller than the first, but breathing, alive. Julie burst out laughing. "I knew it. Twins again. I win this round." David wanted to smile with her, but unease coiled in his stomach. He knew Nessie well enough to sense she still wasn't finished. Her sides rippled, her eyes rolled, and her body heaved with more effort. He stared, pale creeping across his face. But why wasn't Nessie done? Minutes stretched like hours. David knelt so close he could feel the heat radiating from her body. Then, impossibly, another movement. A third set of hooves pressed against the birth canal. Julie's gasp cut through the barn. "David! No, that's not possible." His throat tightened, his voice barely a whisper. "Impossible." But the evidence was there. He slid his hands carefully into position, guiding Nessie through her third push. The calf was weaker than the others, smaller but alive. It gave the faintest cry, barely audible, before collapsing into the hay. Triplets. David stared down at the 3 tiny forms, his chest rising and falling in shallow breaths. Triplets were nearly unheard of. 1 in 100,000 births, maybe less. He'd been around cattle his entire life and never seen it once. Could Nessie even survive this? He glanced up. Nessie was still on her side, flanks shuddering, eyes glassy. She made no attempt to rise. Panic spread through him. He pressed a hand to her rib cage. Her heartbeat thundered, too fast, straining. Julie's hand went to her mouth. "David, she's not getting up." He swallowed hard. The joy of the miracle births twisted quickly into dread. Triplets alone might be a blessing, but it also meant risk, hemorrhage, exhaustion, death. He knew too well how thin the line was between life and loss. David reached for the disinfectant, his rope, anything he might need. But as he leaned closer, his palm brushed Nessie's belly and felt it. Movement, still inside. His blood ran cold. A 4th calf. "No," he whispered, shaking his head as if denial could make it vanish. She can't do 4. Julie stared at him, horrified. 4? David, that'll kill her." Nessie groaned, her body quaking with another wave of effort. David held his breath, torn between awe and terror. Calves weren't meant to come this way. Not 3, not 4. Each birth pushed her closer to the brink. He pressed his forehead to the wooden rail, praying under his breath. "Hold on, girl. Just hold on." The 3 newborns cried weakly beside him, their voices thin and fragile, as if begging their mother to survive. David looked from them back to Nessie, every nerve screaming with fear. Was this miracle about to turn into a tragedy? Julie's hands fumbled for her phone, her voice high with panic. "I'm calling the vet. She's not moving, David." "Do it," David barked, his tone sharp, more to mask his fear than anything else. "Tell him it's urgent. Tell him she's got 3 calves on the ground and she's still straining." Julie stumbled back toward the farmhouse, phone pressed to her ear, while David dropped to his knees beside Nessie. The 3rd calf had stopped bleeding. Its tiny chest wasn't rising. "No, no, no," David muttered, grabbing the calf with trembling hands. He shoved aside the bucket, reached for a towel, and began rubbing furiously along its sides. "Come on, little one. Breathe for me." The limp body gave nothing back. He tilted its head, cleared the airway, then pressed his lips close and blew gently into its nostrils, something he'd only done twice in his entire life. His heart hammered in his ears. Julie's voice cut through the barn, shrill with terror. "David? The vet's coming, but he says it'll be at least 20 minutes. "We don't have 20 minutes, David snapped. He pressed harder on the calf's ribs, desperation boiling over. "Come on, fight. You've got to fight." The calf twitched, just barely. David froze, then redoubled his effort. He rubbed harder, coaxing, begging, until finally a thin, ragged cry pierced the air. David slumped forward in relief, tears stinging his eyes. "That's it. That's my girl. Stay with us." But his relief shattered instantly when Nessie let out a guttural groan. Her body convulsed, legs kicking against the hay. She was still pushing. The 4th calf was coming whether they were ready or not. Julie raced back to his side, eyes wide. "David, she can't do this. It'll kill her." He met her gaze, pale and grim. "I know." They both turned as Nessie strained, her entire frame trembling with exhaustion. Blood streaked the hay, her breathing shallow and erratic. David clenched his fists. If he tried to pull the calf, he could injure Nessie, or worse, tear something inside her. If he waited, she might not have the strength to finish. "Tell me what to do," Julie cried, clutching his arm. David shook his head, torn. "I don't know, Julie. If I go in now, I could lose her. If I don't..." His voice cracked. "We could lose them all." The sound of tiny cries filled the barn, the 3 calves already born, calling weakly for the mother who couldn't answer them. David cursed under his breath, grabbed the rope, and steadied himself at Nessie's hindquarters. "Julie, hold her head. Talk to her. Keep her calm." Julie dropped to her knees, stroking Nessie's muzzle. "Stay with us, girl. Please stay with us. You can do this." David positioned the rope carefully around the visible hooves of the 4th calf. His palms were slick with sweat. "All right, Nessie. On 3. Push when I pull." She groaned, shuddering, and David pulled with every ounce of strength he had. Julie shouted encouragement, her voice breaking. "She's not moving, David." "She has to," he yelled back, pulling harder. "Come on, Nessie." At that moment, the barn door banged open. The vet rushed in, bag slung over his shoulder, eyes widening as he took in the sight of 3 calves on the ground and David struggling with the 4th. "Good Lord," the vet muttered. "Do you know what this means? Quadruplets, odds of 1 in 700,000. But she won't survive unless we move now." He dropped to the ground, shoving tools into David's hands. "Steady pull. Don't twist. Keep the pressure even." Together they worked in unison. Nessie let out one last cry, her body convulsing as the fourth calf slid free, limp and slick in the hay. For one terrifying moment, it didn't move. Julie screamed, "It's dead!" David fell to his knees, gripping the calf, shaking his head violently. "No, not yet. Not while I'm here." He rubbed it down, cleared its nose, praying for any sign of life. Seconds stretched into eternity. Then, miraculously, the calf coughed, a weak cry escaping its lungs. Julie sobbed with relief, covering her mouth. The vet leaned back, shaking his head in disbelief. "I've been practicing for 20 years. I've never seen anything like this." But the joy was short-lived. Nessie collapsed, her head slamming into the hay, eyes fluttering. Her sides barely moved. "No," David whispered, dropping to her side. "Stay with me, girl. Don't you dare leave now." The barn filled with the sound of newborn cries, 4 tiny voices wailing, searching for the mother who might never rise again. David pressed his forehead against her neck, tears sliding into her fur. Time, biology, fate. They were all against him. And for the first time in decades, the farmer who thought he'd seen it all found himself powerless. The vet leaned over, shaking his head in awe. "Do you understand what you've just witnessed? Quadruplets. The odds are 1 in 700,000. Most don't survive the delivery. But all 4 of these calves, they're alive." David's face drained of color, his whole body trembling. He'd spent his life among cattle, yet nothing had prepared him for this moment. Pale and silent, he realized he was staring at something no farmer expected to see in their lifetime, the impossible made real. But the miracle was not without cost. Nessie lay on her side, her breath shallow, her body nearly limp from exhaustion. The vet checked her quickly, his expression grave. "She'll make it through, but she hasn't got the strength to nurse all of them. At best, she can care for one." David's heart twisted as he looked at the 4 newborns, tiny, fragile, searching for warmth. He stroked Nessie's head, whispering to her as if she could understand. "You've given enough, girl. I'll take care of the rest." Together, he and Julie carried 3 of the calves into a smaller stall nearby, tucking them into clean hay and offering bottles of warm milk. Their cries softened as they suckled, fragile but fighting. When David returned to the main pen, something caught his breath. The 4th calf, the tiniest of them all, was already standing, its spindly legs trembling but determined. And instead of crying for milk, it pressed itself against Nessie's neck, nuzzling into her as if it had chosen her above the others. Julie's eyes widened. "David, look at her. She's already bonded." Nessie stirred, lifting her head just enough to lick the calf's damp fur. Her tongue moved weakly, but with unmistakable tenderness. The calf let out another cry, stronger this time, as if claiming her spot at her mother's side. The vet gave a small, incredulous smile. "Sometimes nature decides for us. That one, she's the miracle girl, the smallest, yet the strongest." David sank onto the hay, watching the tiny calf press against its mother with fierce determination. Against every odd, she had survived. Against every rule of nature, she had thrived. And Nessie, despite her weakness, seemed to find a spark of strength each time the little one nudged her side. In that moment, David understood why his face had gone pale, why his knees had almost buckled. He hadn't just seen 4 calves born. He had witnessed a miracle, one that defied science, odds, and reason. And somehow, he knew this smallest calf, the miracle girl, was going to change everything. 6 weeks later, the barn no longer carried the heavy silence of that terrifying night. Instead, it rang with life. 4 calves, once fragile and trembling, now bounded through the straw with playful kicks of their legs, their soft cries filling the air with music. Against all odds, every single one had survived. David leaned on the wooden gate, watching them tumble over one another. Their bellies were round, their eyes bright, their legs steady. Nessie, though thinner than before, stood proudly among them, her head held high. She nuzzled each calf in turn, as if counting them over and over to reassure herself they were truly there. When the day finally came to reunite them with the rest of the herd, David opened the gate with a lump in his throat. For a moment, the field went still. The older cows turned, curious, their ears twitching. Then, slowly, they stepped forward, sniffing at the 4 new arrivals. Within minutes, the herd parted to welcome them, circling protectively, as though they understood they were witnessing something rare, something precious. Julie slipped her hand into David's. "Look at them," she whispered. 4 miracles, walking side by side. David swallowed hard, his gaze fixed on the smallest calf, the miracle girl. She was the boldest of the 4, already darting ahead of the others, never far from Nessie's side. He remembered that moment in the barn when he had gone pale, when his heart had nearly stopped. It wasn't just fear he'd felt, it was the overwhelming weight of realizing he was staring at the extraordinary hidden within the ordinary. "This isn't farming anymore," he said quietly, almost to himself. "This is something bigger. Witnessing the extraordinary in the ordinary." Julie leaned her head on his shoulder, and for a long time they stood together, watching the herd accept the impossible as though it belonged. The calves played, the sun dipped low across the fields, and the air carried a peace David hadn't felt in years. Later that evening, as the sky blazed orange and purple, David and Julie walked the fence line. The work had been grueling, the kind that left hands blistered and backs aching, but neither complained. Their bet had ended in a tie, neither winner nor loser. And yet, as they leaned against the last post, gazing back at the pasture, they both knew the truth. "We lost the bet," Julie said with a smile, brushing the dirt from her hands. David shook his head, his lips curving into a rare grin. "No, Julie. We won something far greater." The field stretched wide before them, dotted with life, hope, and the proof of miracles. And as the 4 calves nudged playfully against their mother, David realized this story wasn't just about a cow giving birth. It was about faith, survival, and the beauty of witnessing what should never have been possible.